If you've ever wanted to start a podcast, but you're hung up on I don't know where to start. I don't know what my message is. I don't know who my audience is. How do I create a podcast? What gear do I need? And what platform should I put this onto to host it? And how do I edit it? And all of the things. This episode is for you. I'm excited because I'm bringing in an expert today to break down the various steps on how to quickly and easily get started into podcasting, because it has been, at least for me, one of the most powerful platforms to create on. And if you're new here, welcome. I'm Lozada, your host of Everyday Badassery. I'm so excited for this mini series. I'm bringing in different experts to talk about how to help you as a creator or a small business person be 1% more badass in the way you create content. And this episode, I'm bringing in Ted, someone who I've had on this podcast before. All of his info and a lot of the things, all the things we reference in today's podcast episode are going to be in the show notes below for you. So especially if you are listening to this while you're on the go, don't forget, come back to the show notes. There's a lot in there for you, especially around helping you out to be smarter as a creator or a small business person. On that note, let's get to podcasting. Let's bring in Ted.
Hi, my name's Ted Cragg. Pleasure to be back with you. We did a wonderful episode together in the middle of 2023, and now we're back. I'm back to talk some more about podcasting.
Which I'm so excited about, because I always push people toward podcasts as being one of the best platforms that's both easiest to create for and also most effective. But one of the top things that people always come to me with is like, but like, where do I start? And then they start overthinking it. And so in today's episode, we're going to do our best to give you some ideas on like where to start. So, because actually, full transparency, Ted gave me a lot of ideas on how I have pivoted and thought about restarting or thinking differently about my own podcast. And so Ted, actually, I'm going to let you start, because it often starts with the idea. How would you guide somebody on when they're like, oh, like, where do I start my podcast? I'm always like, start with the idea. What would you say?
Start with the idea, start with the objective of the idea. What do you want to get out of this? And what do you want your audience to get out of it, especially? And that's going to evolve. Of course, these things are going to change and evolve over time, but you start somewhere. So when you're thinking about embarking on this project, and it could be a short-term thing, which we'll talk about, it could be a longer commitment to the podcast. It's an ongoing thing, but who's it for? What do you want them to get out of it? What kind of action do you want them to take? And then you start to work backwards from there in terms of, okay, how am I going to talk about that? And, what's my angle for it? Of course, if you have a business, if you're thinking about a business that's maybe born out of that plays a part. Maybe it's a passion project. Maybe it's just a way to get yourself out there. But it starts with your audience. I mean, they're the listeners. They're the people who are going to consume this, and you want them to do something with it. So think about that fundamental question. What do you want people to get from your podcast?
Yeah, and I'll take that one step further, because one thing when I think about audience is, for me, I literally have an avatar of who I am speaking to. And it doesn't mean that literally is the person who is on the other side listening or watching, but kind of generally who I'm trying to speak to. And whether you have an audience now and you are actively meeting them, for example, Ted knows I've been on Virgin Voyages a lot lately, literally meeting my audience. But whether you are meeting them or you haven't met them yet, one thing I love to do is, even when I'm at the grocery store or I'm at the airport or I'm at any place with lots of people there, I look around, I look at the different people, and I say, who do I think I would be speaking to? Who do I think would want to be hearing my message? It's probably not, and then fill in the blank, like that person over there who blah, 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 blah. They probably can't relate to me at all. But that person over there probably could. And it's important for me to go through this exercise, because when a lot of people get either on the camera, if you're doing a video podcast, or on the microphone, they don't know who they're speaking to. And for me, when I have that avatar or I have that vision of in my head of who I'm speaking to, it becomes easy, because I feel like one of my avatar's names is Lindsay. When I press record or when I look into the camera, I treat it like I'm speaking to Lindsay in that moment, or I'm
Mm.
looking at Lindsay in that moment. And it makes it feel easier to me because I know who's watching or listening on the other side. And that helps to guide me on, instead of being very scripted, like, I
Yeah.
need to make sure we cover this, this, and this, and this. And it's like, well, what would Lindsay ask me? Like, what would she ask next? Like, how would I
Yeah.
do that? Because one of the next things is, what action do you want your person or your Lindsay to take? And so
Hmm.
actually, Ted, do you mind so make sure, I know I said this in the intro, but make sure you check the show notes, because lots of the very insanely helpful things that Ted offers is in there. And he's worked with a lot of people, but can you give an example of like an action that someone might take from someone's podcast? Um,
Hmm.
or like what their objective is and what their action is that they want their audience to take.
There's kind of a generic starting point, which is important when you're first starting the podcast. You want it to grow. You want people to know about it and share it. So it's a bit cliche, but the thing of share and like this podcast, tell people about it, it makes a difference.
It does.
And especially in those early stages of growth. Now, you may also be launching right from day one with maybe a product or some kind of incentive. You may have a landing page, you may have a newsletter. And if that's the case, then absolutely, I would say, point people to that number one entry point where you want to get them into your ecosphere. So a key part of that is keep it simple. You can't have like 5 or 6 calls to action. At the end of an episode, people will tune it out and they'll forget. We all would. So you have to choose kind of one thing, really, highlight the most important thing, and that's going to be their first step. It makes
Yeah.
it easier to track too. You may have kind of programs for this, but if you're thinking, "Well, I'm seeing some more subscribers to my newsletter now," that could be why, because you highlighted that one thing from your podcast.
Yeah, I love that. Like, in what way, even especially if you're just starting, can you capture people?
Hmm.
Because for me, in full transparency, when my podcast started as, everyday badassery and like inspirational travel stories. And for me, that was a passion project, right?
Yeah.
I literally just wanted people to think differently and step out of their comfort zone. And for me, the action I wanted them to take was to exactly that, like just a little bit, do something a little bit differently. And so my entry point was, I had a journal that I created. And so as you would listen to each episode, there would be a couple prompts in there to help someone be like, okay, I listened to this episode. Here's some questions that go with it, and to journal it in a way that when you put something in writing for yourself, you are more likely to take action on that. You can
Yeah.
see how, like in this example, I'm not, again, passion project. I'm not necessarily selling something, but I'm getting people onto an email list, right? So I
Hmm.
can speak to them as a result of downloading the journal. And then I'm also separately trying to make sure that my podcast has some kind of impact beyond just, okay, that was a cool story. All right, what's next? But,
Yeah.
and so as a result, when people reach out to me, because one of the things I always say in my podcast episodes is, if something spoke to you, if you felt something here, please connect with me. And I
Mm.
will say, actually, what would I say? I would say 9 out of 10 times, the types of messages that I get from people make me, in a positive way, cry every time. Like
Okay.
really positive messages of people stepping outside of their comfort zones or making a positive change in their life that they know they've been needing, but they just
Mm.
needed to hear it. Make the positive change in your life. Be starting a podcast, BTW. There's
How do you?
the action item
That's
for that
good.
one.
And how do you ask people to contact you? Is it like an email? Do you have some form? How do you make that as easy as possible?
That's a good, well, I, when I originally went after, like, what is my branding? Like, what is my objective overall? A long time ago, I'm like,
Yeah.
I know I'm going to be talking about a lot of different things. So I just branded everything under my name. I'm
Mm.
at Christine Lozada everywhere.
Yeah.
Connect with me. And also, like in the show notes, there's ways to find me. But I always just drive people to find me at Christine Lozada, which is my handle, on every single
Hmm.
platform. And then they just send me a message. And each person will message me in different places, whether it's
Okay.
an Instagram DM, a Facebook Messenger message, or fill in the blank with whatever it is. But
Hmm.
that's the way that's worked for me.
Yeah, that's
So
good.
we've been talking about action. Like, what's the action you want someone to take? And here's one more example. Ted, I don't know if you know about this. I've realized that I want to take my audience, my travel audience, on a
Hmm.
badass adventure. And
Cool.
so I'm launching group trips. And
Hmm.
so if you've been listening to my podcast lately, you'll know that it's been a drive toward inviting people to come on this group trip with me, a retreat like group trip. And so
Hmm.
that's the action item for that. So whether you know you have a product, a service, or it's just an email list, that's a great place. You never know what platform is going to push your content and which one will give you
Hmm.
5 middle fingers and not push your content at all. Like, you just never know.
Yeah. And then keeping essentially your branding kind of identity consistent so that people can find you. You don't have different names for different accounts and, profiles and stuff. That helps for sure.
Yeah, it does. And I would say, like, even with starting a show, like Ted, you kind of alluded to this of like what will your intro and outro be each time? And
Hmm.
like that's one where the way and Ted, I'd like to break down like kind of like the how to think about this, because a lot of people will try to start with the topics, which I think is fine. It's important to brainstorm your topics. But it's important to know, like, for me, the consistent branding has been helpful. I have from day one said the same thing at the beginning and the end, which comes back to like, what was the objective? Right.
Hmm.
And the objective for me when I started was helping people to be just 1%, a little bit more badass today than they were yesterday. And
Hmm.
for me, that really came just from the, thinking about who my audience is. Who do I want to be speaking to? And what action do I want them to take? And therefore, what might be the right way to speak to this person? That was the
Hmm.
way that I thought about it. And I knew it was something I could stand behind no matter what, no matter like what was changing in other
Yeah.
content or things like that. What's your reactions to that?
If you have a clear message then like that, that's kind of evergreen, it lasts for indefinite amount of time. It takes some thought. I think that's one of those things where, you try to say as much as you can in as few words, like good editing. So it can take a bit of time and brainstorming, but if you can put that together, that's a valuable investment of your time as part of planning your show.
Yeah, take the time to think about that part and try not to get into your head so much about it, but really
Mm.
like, what is your heart and your gut telling you in terms of what message you want to give to the world? So I
Hmm.
actually want to pivot real quick and talk about something that Ted inspired me to do, which is what you are listening to right now, which is a mini series.
Yeah.
And a mini series can look like a lot of different things, but Ted, give us some insight. What's a mini series?
I was inspired by this idea because I got a lot of feedback, maybe pushback from people in general. They rarely became clients, I suppose, because the thought of starting a podcast was intimidating. Am I going to have
Overwhelming.
to be doing this? Yeah, for indefinite amount of time, the next 2 years, 5 years, and I mean, you could look at it that way. But to wrap your head around a project like this in a much easier way, you'd absolutely have permission to consider doing a short form podcast, so a mini series or seasonal based and things like that. And that can work really well. It helps you structure it. You know how it begins, you know how it ends. You can kind of bookend it and work backwards so that you're not wondering where you're going to be on episode 10. You already know. It might be a little more scripted, but not necessarily. It gives you that kind of framework, and then it's a much easier project to take on. It's typically a fair bit of work in a short amount of time, and then you could release all episodes at once. You could kind of release them on a weekly basis. We see a lot of popular podcasts, of celebrities and stuff do this anyway. They do seasonal podcasts that they release 2 or 3 months of the year, and then that's it. And then you see them next year. I mean, TV shows do this, a Netflix series, so it's a very common thing. And I encourage people to consider that for yourself and for your own projects. It's part of your portfolio. You add it to your website. Maybe if it's as evergreen as possible, it's something that lasts, indefinitely in that sense for a couple of years or more. You can refer people back to it. Check out the mini series that I did on this topic. You could do a whole bunch of different things. You can start with a short form podcast, a season, and then without necessarily intending to do more. And then, hey, that was really great. I'm going to do a season 2. It's exciting, everyone. We're going to do another season, right? You could start a different one on a whole different topic. I find it really gives you a lot more flexibility than being locked in. And you can always change things. We've talked about before how podcast, you have lots of flexibility. You can change and you can pivot. I mean, you're doing that yourself. I've done it too. And that's fine. But if you're kind of intentional from the outset that I know I want to just do a sample type series of, again, 10, 12 episodes, whatever it is, go for it. You absolutely have permission to do that.
Right. And like I listen to Ted and it feels to me like relief. It feels like relief because too many people are
Yeah.
too hard on themselves. And namely because they'll oftentimes look to people who've been podcasting for years and this is the way they're doing it. There's so many
Mm.
ways to do it. And so there's two things that I have already done that Ted suggested to me. One was do a mini series within your podcast. I always knew
Yeah.
I wanted to help people to be 1% more badass today than they were yesterday. But now I'm doing this mini series within that around helping people in their creator business, at their travel creator business, or even in their entrepreneurial or small business
Mm.
to pivot and be 1% more badass in that. And it's like, why not? I'm doing this within a series within that. And then
Yeah.
after this series, I will go on to whatever the next series is. And the
Yeah.
other thing that I have tried that Ted suggested is we always feel, and I feel like it's different for other platforms where if you go dark, like if you go dark and you do
Mm.
not post to YouTube, you do not post to Instagram, you do not post to TikTok or Facebook, like those platforms will punish you. I
Mm.
feel very differently about podcasting. With
Yes.
podcasting, because of the intimacy, think about it. We are literally in your ear right now because of
Yeah.
the intimacy that you have with your audience, that you've created with your audience. Like, you know, immediately think about someone that you recently spoke to, and you're like, oh my God, if I have to hear that person speak for one more second, like I will fill in the blank, pull your hair out, whatever it is,
Yeah.
right? With
Sure.
podcasting, you're intimately in someone's ear. And if you go away for a while, things got really busy for me on the drone front, and I was doing that for a while. And this
Hmm.
podcast took the back seat, and I did not put out an episode for about 3 months, something
Hmm.
like that. I'm sure if you scroll through my history, you'll see there's a gap in there. And when
Yeah.
I came back like I was never gone.
There you go.
And and even when I was talking about Ted, I was like, did we really podcast together, Ted, in 2023? That info is in the show notes below, by the way. I was like, wow, that feels like 500 years ago, but
Hmm.
people still listen to that episode, and you should too. You can find it in the show notes. The people will always come back, and they'll come later.
Yeah.
It's
But you know why that
okay.
is? I mean, I don't want to take this for granted in a sense, but part of it is we actually have a benefit here from the apps and the way podcast distribution is set up, because most people listen on their phone. They have an app. They discover a show, they like it, and they follow it or subscribe. And then it stays in their playlist. It takes an active effort to go in and sort through all of your shows and start deleting ones. Most people don't really do that. So the benefit is it could be 6 months, a year, or it could be 3 years later. And suddenly, oh, you put out a new episode. And if you're intentional about it and you're like, I'm back and I'm going to start doing episodes again and whatever on a weekly basis or whatever your schedule is, oh, this is great. So and so is back. And I bet everybody listening can think of, if they're avid podcast listeners for sure, can think of podcasts they've seen do this. You know, that great show I listened to, they disappeared. They probably may not have said anything about it. They just disappeared. And then, oh, they came back. Maybe they had a crazy story about what happened in the meantime, right? But your listeners are still there. So again, I mean, you got to be a little careful. Not everyone's going to come back and all the rest, but you're starting with a solid foundation that already exists instead of starting from scratch all over again. This is not an algorithm that's going to punish you.
Yeah.
You can really make the most of it.
I just feel like there's so much more grace here than other platforms, which is why
Yes.
I always tell people to go after podcasting. And our original topic that Ted and I talked about was the impact of telling
Mm.
your story. So like that impact part, if you're interested about that, check out the other episode. But
Yeah.
let's start. So we've kind of given you the like how to think about your story, where to start, the actions and the audience that you're looking for. Let's geek out for a couple minutes on gear, because when
Sure.
it comes to gear, and Ted has some resources, you can also read about this as well. I see myself as being what's the bare minimum gear setup that I can have. And Ted's a little bit more fancy, especially if you're watching today's episode. Ted, what would you recommend as a bare minimum to start? And then we'll kind of build on it, that people have when they first start podcasting.
Honestly, I'm going to say from a bare minimum that you want a microphone that you can plug in. And I keep it as simple as that. And that includes what you're wearing in your ears right now, because there's a microphone on that wire, right? And
Mhm.
that's better than the worst thing you can do, which is simply talk into a laptop microphone, which is the poorest quality. It's going to capture everything and nothing in a way like it's full of reverb, and your voice will sound all muffled like you're underwater. So I mean, even a set of earphones that you can plug in, they're like $15 or come with your phone, right? That's better than nothing, because if you're plugged in, you're wired, you're not reliant on Bluetooth or wireless stuff that can cut in and out, and you're closer to the mic. I don't have that on this, but imagine I had a microphone, right? And you're closer to the mic, so that's a step ahead already. So I'd start with that.
Yeah, microphone is everything. And I'll actually bring that one step further because
Mm,
when I first started, and now I'm just shifting to YouTube videos. When I first started creating my YouTube channel, I prioritized the cinematic shot. And I
yeah,
didn't realize that the priority is the sound. The priority is
yeah,
the sound. Like, think
that's
about anything
fascinating,
you've
isn't it?
ever watched, and you can't watch it if, and I'm not going to give you an example with the microphone right now because nobody's ears need to be hurt, or we'll fill in the blank. But if it doesn't sound right, it's just too hard to pay attention. Like
Yeah,
you can't. And so the sound is everything. And my first microphone that I used was was $10. It was $10. And even the microphone I use now, I think is I think it's like $50 or
it sounds
something. It's not
fine.
you can buy
Yeah.
it. You can buy microphones from Target and Walmart.
Hmm.
Ted's microphone's not brand new. How long have you been using your current microphone for?
Oh, this is, I figured it's about 7 years old. Yeah.
It was
And
just
it's been around
in the
long,
world of
like the model's been around for
technology.
10 years. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, in the world of technology, like that's an old microphone, and
Yeah.
Ted sounds great, doesn't he?
It still works. Yeah. Everything works fine. It's all plugged in. Yeah. So, hey, if it breaks down, then I'll get one. But I don't know. That could be another 3 or 4 years or more.
Yeah. And
So,
actually, so starting with a microphone, and there are some times, and actually, I did a little mini series. Speaking of mini series, I did a
hmm,
mini series when I was in Tepoztlan. Tepoztlan's a obscure place in Mexico, south of Mexico City, and I was there and I had chosen to do a creative challenge, which was I was at, I'll kind of vaguely call it a wellness retreat with the
hmm,
Location Indie team, which is actually how I met Ted through Camp Indie. And
hmm,
every day I chose to film a podcast episode. I was like, I'm going to do a daily podcast episode, kind of recapping what I learned and what happened that day. What was interesting was technology held me back.
hmm,
I would film these in a rush between running from one event to the next or filming one thing to the next because I was actively filming during this event. And
hmm,
I realized that if I was going to do a video podcast, it was too hard for me because I was not wearing makeup. I looked like hell. I was very tired. Like the setting up my video would take probably just like 5 minutes when I only had 10 minutes to film the podcast episode. And so I
hmm,
literally plugged my microphone directly into my iPhone and through a voice memo would record the podcast audio. And I
yeah,
instead put that over using Canva
hmm.
video, like that just shows the audio movement of like a
Okay. Yeah.
microphone,
Like
like a
waveforms.
wave.
Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly. And that was my way of being able to create something and not be held back by technology. And I
Hmm.
was able to put out I think 4 or 5 podcast miniseries from Postland. That was my setup.
Yeah. Okay.
Where does your podcast feed
Hmm.
into, Ted?
Well, so you can see here at the back of this microphone. That's why I recommend ones like this. Is the ATR 2100. I think they have a newer version now. Samsung is another model similar. Look for ones that have two input outputs. You can see these 3 pins here. I don't have it plugged in right now. This is for an XLR microphone cable. If you happen to have, and you don't need this, but if you happen to have a mixing board,
Mm.
a portable recording device like one of these, I would plug that XLR into one of these holes here, and then I can record into these tracks. I don't have to do that. That's just an option. I like having options if you can. If it's within the price, then you might as well. But 99% of the time, really, I'm just plugged in, as you can see here, with the USB. This is going directly into my computer, we're using StreamYard, and I have good experience, and you do too, with StreamYard. It's pretty reliable and good quality. Anything that's recorded over the internet, which is what we're doing here, the sound is going to be compressed a little bit. StreamYard's a little bit better than that. It's much better than Zoom and other things. So try to use a platform like StreamYard or Riverside and similar ones like that, where you can record your actual episodes. But fundamentally, yeah, this microphone is wired into the computer, and that gives me the option. I could record locally into my computer if I had another program open at the same time, basically as a backup. Again, Riverside and these others, StreamYard, are pretty reliable. But we can talk more about some of that. But that's where I'm wired into.
Yeah. And so he's just feeding it directly into the computer and I'm
Mm-hmm.
capturing it on my side. And for those who are listening and not watching today, what Ted was showing was a very fancy item, which basically allows you to do things like making sure that if I suddenly start laughing maniacally, like I do sometimes, that when it's very, very high pitch and loud, it will kind of dub that down just a little bit so it doesn't sound so crazy. Basically, it'll
Yeah.
just, it'll make it real nice. But the other option is, he had said this here, which is a new feature within StreamYard, actually, which is recording locally. And
Yeah.
so one thing that I will do is my microphone is plugged directly into my laptop. I'm just for my video version using the camera that's in the laptop. You can be fancy and put in, I mean, yeah, I have a DSLR and all the other things, but this is quite easy for me and it's fine.
Mm-hmm.
But I will, StreamYard is allowing me to grab your audio track and mine. So
Yep.
just in case, like sometimes you'll have a guest or you're talking to someone and one person sounds really far away and the
Yeah.
other person's
Exactly.
nice and close to the mic. It allows you to change that in the edit, which
Mm-hmm.
join us in our next episode because we're talking about editing. But kind of to
Mm-hmm.
recap the gear, I mean, it
Yeah.
doesn't have to be a lot. There are a lot of
No.
options that you have. Basically, a microphone is really what you need to
Yep.
start. And Ted, I
Yep.
have one more FAQ. This is a very frequently asked question,
Okay.
which is around the need for a co-host. So
Oh,
many people ask, like, I can't do a podcast without somebody, though. Can I? And it's like, well, why not?
you can do whatever you want.
Yeah, exact right. Like going back to the relief, right? There's
Sure.
so
Sure.
many ways to do it. What would your reaction be for someone who asks that FAQ? Do I need a
That they.
co-host?
Oh, you don't need one. I mean, there's pros and cons to it. It's going to take. Do you want to have? Well, I'll stay back up right away. Like, if you're going to have a co-host, it's got to be someone who you have a rapport with, who you're going to play off each other. Perhaps each person has their role. One person kind of introduces things, the other's like the color commentator type thing. Whatever it is, you have to kind of set out that role. Are you then going to be interviewing people? Because that introduces a third person, which is certainly possible. And who's going to be asking questions? Are you going to be able to cue each other? So you can see where having a co-host can be a little complicated. Take some practice. It really takes a while to ease into that role, both people into those roles, which in my view says, well, I'll just do it by myself. But if hey, all that being said, if you and I wanted to start a podcast or do a mini series, like, I'm not opposed to having a co-host. It just, you really have to know what the purpose is and if it's going to fit with, yeah, your structure and your content and your message. But I think that's where it really comes back to your style.
Mm.
Probably more than anything is that, am I going to feel more comfortable? Is it going to be easier, more enjoyable by myself? Or maybe you are more comfortable and it's easier with someone else. And that's cool. But you do have to find the right person.
Yeah, finding the right person is key. And
Yeah.
in my opinion, when I first started this podcast series, I was like, well, the style in which I originally started recording was on the go. And
Mm,
I would always record in the places I traveled to. And I was resistant to doing any Zoom like calls or StreamYard like calls over the internet. I
yeah.
always wanted it to be in place. Going back to our gear conversation, I sacrifice sound. When you
Mm,
record, even with microphones, while you're sitting on a yacht in the Maldives outside, that's not quiet and that sound sucks, even with all of again, we'll talk about
yeah.
editing in the next episode. And so I was sacrificing sound. And so what I realized was not only did I need a quiet setting, but I knew since I was doing this on the go, it needed to be just me. And
Hmm.
my version of bringing in co-hosts, a lot of these episodes I'll do alone. And oftentimes I'll bring in someone where I know we can talk well about a topic, which is why
Yeah.
Ted is here today. And
Yeah.
so a host does
Hmm.
or does not need to be what's for you. It's really just about understanding yourself and what environment will you succeed in,
Hmm.
which join us in this next episode about editing.
Yeah.
But first, Ted, tell us, where can people find you? It's all in the show notes, but please tell us anyway.
Right. So I do podcast production. My business is called quickeditpodcasts.com. And it's really designed as an on-demand type audio production service. So whether you need one episode, maybe one random episode, sure, maybe you have 2 or 4 a month, you can choose whatever you need done, send it over to us. It's a really easy software. You just place your order and put in your payment. You upload the files right there in the software on the site. I get a little message from my team. We download it and we get it back to you in 48 hours. So it's a really nice streamlined service. Now that's kind of the fundamental service, but we do offer lots of things, and I'm really pushing and encouraging people to do the short form podcast style, which is a bigger project. That takes a lot more communication and planning, between yourself and me or one of my team. But it's a fun thing to do because I really like doing these things that have a beginning and then an end. As a multi-potentialite myself, I like to do different things. So I can't stick, it's hard for me to stick to one project indefinitely myself. So I like doing short form stuff too.
I love that. Thank you for doing this with me, Ted. Join
Yeah.
us in our next episode.
See
Oh,
you then.
Ted, don't forget, so much of his info is in the show notes below. Make sure you connect with him and connect with me. I'm at Christine Lozada everywhere. And don't forget, this is only one of a part of a mini series within the mini series that I do with Ted. He and I have a few more episodes together. Join us in the next one. Podcasting is part of your creator journey, part of growing your small business or growing your audience. It's a powerful platform. In our next episode, we talk about tactics for editing. So join us in the next one, and I'll see you over there. Ciao.